does happen. Witnessed that at conferences where two different professors were going back and forth and going at it really, really hard at each other. Well, at each other in argumentation anyway, discussing a particular topic, and the rest of us are looking at the room like, oh boy. Well, happy 2023. Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to be back with all of you. Got some new stuff going on. First things first up is actually I get back and I'm going right back out again on the road next week. So I will pre-tape some things for y'all next week. And I think I'm going to focus on the aptly named Fiedler on the Roof affair and talk a little bit about that because I think it epitomizes a lot of the potential pitfalls and problems and what have you. So I'll record a bunch of that this week and let that go up next week while I'm away. But also, Side Chat Saturday will return on the 21st. I can't tell you yet, but I do have a guest in mind who will probably be joining us for that. So stay tuned. I think it's going to be a fun show. I think y'all are going to have a blast with it, particularly if you like the craziness with words. So, I saw this pop up in Quillette. Whatever you think of Quillette, most of the time you can find some decent pieces there. And I thought this was one of them that was fairly even-handed. Written by a Christopher Ferguson, who is a professor. So, I mean, his name's on it, so I'm not revealing anything unknown there. So, but it reminded me of something here in the vein of problems with academia. And of course, why do I talk about academia? It's because it's where we train the next generation of scientists. And so it is important to talk about the things going on in academia and what to do about it. I, generally speaking, do not favor censorship regardless here. But at the same time, you have to do your damnedest to promote an environment where people are not self-censoring. And that is unfortunately some of the environment we find in current academia, as it is right now in the United States, is a culture where self-censorship is pushed because of many things. And I think in here this is good to talk about it. And then I want to give you a good example of things that those of you who are not academics but would like to see things improve in academia can do in this. And so I will give you a good example to finish with that, because I think that's something to help with this. And short answer in the too long didn't read version or too long didn't listen version of this video, money talks. Put it that way. Let's see. I've been teaching college for 25 years. I love my job and I'll probably die doing it. But the challenges I've seen for academia in the last few years are the worst I can remember. From the right, politicians are attempting to diminish academic freedom, suppress speech, and weaken tenure. From the left, implausible theories are enforced like sacred dogmas by zealous activists, feckless administrators, and online mobs, creating a different but equally dangerous attack on academic freedom. Public confidence in universities is dropping, as are enrollments. How bad is it for us professors working in academia? Let's see. To be blunt, there is voluminous nonsense on college campuses. I've experienced it firsthand, as I often have, to disabuse students of nonsense they've picked up somewhere else in the university. To be fair, students should be exposed to nonsense from time to time, because students should hear a wide variety of opinions on almost any subject, and you should encourage students to listen to a wide variety of opinions on every topic. And you should do the next thing that the professor's talking about too. Professors should give students a toolkit of critical thinking skills, not a litany of facts or dogmas. Therefore, when students encounter nonsense, whether it be in the New York Times or in the sociology department or on Fox News, they can inspect it, criticize it, and reject it. But more and more professors are skipping the toolkit and directly feeding nonsense to their students. In fact, many are training them to substitute thoughtful criticism with moral accusations and outrage. Oh boy. This has been most obvious in the years since Trump's election in 2016, though I think it goes back at least to the Great Awakening around 2014. No fan of Trump myself, I was nonetheless surprised in 2016 by the level of outrage and hostility among some students by the quasi-therapeutic safety culture exhibited by many universities. The year 2016 was thus my introduction to the new culture that the loudest, the most upset, the most traumatized person would prevail, regardless of the quality of the data or the argument. So, it's a thing to think on this, and he gets into it a little bit more. He gets into it talking about the students are afraid to challenge it, the things like lived experience, which is a stupid phrase to begin with. But in here, people are afraid to challenge that. But what he's talking about in that notion of substituting thoughtful criticism with moral accusations and outrage is something that is very much involved in postmodern thought. In that, you don't allow debate. Debate is a bad thing. Hearing different voices is a bad thing unless you fundamentally agree with my basic premise, then it's okay. But if you disagree with my basic premise, it's bad according to postmodernist thought. This is in cynical theories. Pluckrose and James Lindsay talk about this ad nauseum, where it's you're considered to have moral and intellectual failings if you disagree. That's what's kind of manifest in here, is teaching students that kind of aspect, if you will, telling students that it's okay to say that if they disagree with you, they have moral and intellectual failings. That's really not okay at all. Various popular but empirically dubious theories in the humanities and social sciences set the stage for this. Most prominent among such theories were critical race theory, CRT, and the new postmodern gender ideologies. But other widely practiced post-theories, such as post-colonialism, were crucial as well. Lived experience was often promoted over reason and data, and jargon such as privilege, latinx, and patriarchy and intersectionality and colonialism. That is a... Professor, just gotta say this. Grammatically, that was an awful sentence. You could put some commas in there. Achieved a kind of quasi-religious status that brooked little criticism, excuse me. Students and faculty alike became frightened to challenge these ideas from the left. Faculty who ignored these sacred values, who criticized and challenged the rapidly spreading postmodern equalitarianism, wow, what a word, of activists, were subjected to mobs on Twitter and sometimes even fired. Furthermore, an undeniable hostility to the West and to the United States more specifically has become common in some disciplines, from the social sciences to history and the humanities, bemusing older revered scholars such as Gordon Wood, James McPherson, and Akhil Amar. Among many, the old ideal of dispassionate and unbiased scholarship is seen as archaic and hypocritical. So, a lot of professors, whether they lean left or right, really just do want to teach. And he gets into that here, so I'm not going to belabor that, but I encourage you to go back and read this yourself. As always, links in description. But, sorry, I just heard a cat. And it's dealing with the politically incorrect stuff and helping people to recognize it. I do want to make a point here although the right has been better than the left at identifying the problems with setting the modern university, many of the proposed solutions have been awful. Yeah. Censorship, I don't think, is a good thing necessarily either. Don't get me wrong. I don't think the woke shit is a good idea. I think if you've been around on the channel long enough, you know that I don't like it. You know that I don't think it's a good idea. You know that I think it will be very harmful to STEM and to science in general. So, put that aside. At the same time, the question is figuring out exactly how to do this. I read, and I'll probably cover this when I'm talking about the Fiedler on the Roof saga thus far. There's a point that was made, and I think it's a fair point that even I'd forgotten about at some point. Even though liberal faculty outnumber conservative faculty in some places by an order of 50-1 or more in terms of that ratio of liberal to conservative, that doesn't necessarily mean it's because of a bias. You have to remember that just because there's a disparity does not necessarily mean there's bias against a group. We have to remember that ourselves. Now, that's not to say that there's not a bias either, put it that way. But figuring out how to get back and get the universities to honor the commitment to truth-seeking, the telos of the university, the telos of science for that matter, truth-seeking is a tricky challenge to try and honor that freedom of speech also. Um, And it's not wrong. He's actually talking in here about right-wing censorship. Just as wrong as left-wing censorship, in my view with that. He's also acknowledging, because what he's talking about here is he himself has been targeted by right-wing censorship. Once, after having written an article for CNN on gun control, I received an ethics complaint for a former alum of my university who didn't like my opinion. Fortunately, the claim was preposterous. Complaint was ineffectual. Although the complaints from the right against academia are hyperbolic, to some degree maybe, academics need to acknowledge that they're making it easy for them and losing the public relations war. Repeatedly on college campuses, students and faculty shut down unpopular speakers with hysterics. Universities themselves censor people like Dorian Abbott, disinvited from speaking at MIT for daring to criticize the wisdom of DEI. Hundreds of professors have been investigated, censured, or fired for speaking openly on controversial topics. This became personal for me when my dissertation chair, Charles Nagy, was fired from the University of Central Florida for criticizing the Black Lives Matter narrative. Whether one agrees with his comments is irrelevant. This was a gross violation of due process and academic freedom. Events like this are doing real damage to our academic culture and public reputation. Academics have also behaved hypocritically. During the early stages of the COVID pandemic, public health officials were adamant that public gatherings like protests were bad until they were suddenly good, so long as they were for progressive causes. At the time Dr. Nagy was coming under fire for being off message, a University of Alabama professor tweeted instructions for how to pull down a Confederate obelisk using a few dozen people and some rope. The unwisdom of encouraging activists online to pull down structures using rope and maybe a pickup truck should be obvious, but as far as I know, the professor in this case received no censure. The tweet in question remains up. To be clear, I'm not advocating for anyone to be censured or fired, but the constant progressive hypocrisy is damaging for academia and gives ammunition for right-wing critics. Yeah. Rules don't matter unless they're applied the same to everybody. Let's put it that way. So the typical modern university is struggling and is losing its grip on its once laudable mission of educating and challenging. A form of sanctimonious and tribal activism is pervasive, and even those professors who disagree with it often remain silent. At the same time, many of the proposals from the right are making things worse, not better. So what should we do? Okay. So this is where we get into things that are important. And what is laid out here is fair because I don't think too many of the critiques from the right are wrong. Yes, perhaps a bit overly hyperbolic in some places. But at the same time, it is undoubtable that there is a culture of fear of censorship in a lot of universities, and that many students, not just the right-wing students, left-wing students, because if you're going by the the college free expression surveys, for example, they don't just survey right-wing students, they survey left-wing students too. People don't feel like they can speak their minds freely. They don't feel like everything's going to go crazy. So the question is, what do you do? And thinking about it with respect to scientists, what does it send to scientists, to young scientists? What does it say to young scientists, the next generation, when they feel they can't talk on a controversial issue? Why do I say this? When you're at the frontiers of doing scientific research, as a scientist, you are inherently going to engage with something that's controversial. You're going to be ending up with something controversial. Maybe not something so publicly controversial as that. It may just be something controversial within your own field, like a topic of how to go about doing something, or what treatment works best, or how to approach this problem or that problem, or how to approach this question or this theory competing with this theory, and they're two butting heads theories, and sometimes we do get very invested in our theories. It does happen. Witnessed that at conferences where two different professors were going back and forth and going at it really, really hard at each other. Well, at each other in argumentation anyway, discussing a particular topic, and the rest of us are looking at her like, oh boy, what's going on? But you know what was great about that? That was done at a time those two professors could butt heads to the nth freaking degree on a theory, and at the same time, both at the bar after the conference was over having a beer and chatting. Seriously, that happened. That happened. Things like that happened. Now you're teaching that, now with the way this postmodernist stuff is going, you're teaching that that can't happen. That can't be the case. That if someone disagrees with me, they're morally and intellectually bad. Hold that thought. All right, pardon me on that one. Y'all don't know, but there's another room here with cabinets in it, and I have two cats that like to open cabinet doors, and so I was just had to go investigate that. I apologize. All right, so with that in mind, you're teaching scientists. You're teaching the next generation of scientists, if you allow this postmodernist stuff to influence things, you're teaching the next generation of scientists that one of the things you teach with postmodernism is quite simply that it is wrong. You're a bad person if you disagree with me, which is fundamentally flawed. It's a logical fallacy to begin with, but it's also just destroys any ability to having any airing of controversial issues. And again, I know I've mentioned the Fiedler on the Roof thing, but the Fiedler on the Roof thing is actually a pretty prime example right now of a shit show that happened because of postmodernist thought at this point. More on that coming up in the next week or so. So, what are we to do? Universities should commit to academic freedom. Many university administrators and policymakers have turned away from academic freedom, encouraging censorship of unpopular ideas for one side or another. University administrators need to grow a spine and adamantly refuse to cede ground on free speech issues. All universities should adopt the University of Chicago-style public commitment to free speech, or even better, the Chicago trifecta: free speech, institutional neutrality, and merit-only hiring and promotion. Yes, that's the one thing to do, but how do you get them to do that is going to be the question mark there. There's certain amounts of things you can do with that where it comes from, academics on the insider, like pushing for it. And it has happened. MIT's recent push has been really been interesting to watch because they have really pushed hard for it to get to having those kinds of principles enforced at MIT. Similar universities are doing the same thing now. More so than just getting those things, though. Not just in the university as a whole, but I would really love to see it in a lot of the science disciplines, particularly the social science disciplines, adopted at department level. Not just at university level, adopted at department level. See if you can get that one there, because that actually is where it matters a lot more. At least in my purview, okay. Stop being, here's the thing. Saying that you're going to adopt this is one thing. What I haven't seen yet from a university that have adopted it is the proof that they're actually going to stick by it. And that's going to take a while to come, because you just need to have one of these incidences with like cancel culture incidents or something like that, where something happens, and then you got to prove your mettle where you're going to stick by these principles. And admittedly, the University of Chicago did that in Dorian Abbott's case, and I hope to see that happen with others. But that's the thing. Adopting this doesn't mean anything unless you have enforcement of it. In the case of university policy, that you're not gonna throw somebody out because they said something you don't like. Conservatives need to get involved, but constructively. I have conservative students in my class. They tell me they are often afraid to speak openly, particularly when challenging progressive worldviews. That is not acceptable. They should feel free to express their views and challenge the views of centrist liberals and progressives. The right is correct to lament the self-censorship, but too often, conservatives, though correct in their diagnosis, have offered unpalatable or even counterproductive solutions, ranging from discouraging attendance at universities to defunding them altogether. Here's where I wanted to get to with this, actually. And this is, aside from the other thing, this is what I want to leave off. Conservatives need to stop with the censorship. Universities can only thrive with the free exchange of ideas, including those which are offensive to most people. It's bad, of course, when progressives try to restrict speech, but it's equally bad when conservatives do it. This is a fair point. I agree with that. Instead, conservatives need to invest more in academia. Wealthy conservatives could fund specifically conservative interests, including funding endowed chairs in conservative thought or funding think tanks at universities. Even simply donating money can grant significant influence. That's not entirely true, because considering that I used to donate to my university and it didn't grant me a whole lot of influence there, my alma mater, that didn't necessarily grant me a whole lot of influence there. That said, here's where I want to make a point to all of you who are watching. If you're donating to a university as an alumni for me, alumni or an alumna, because the word in the Latin actually is a gendered word, check out what your university is doing. Is your university doing things you like with respect to free speech? Is your university not doing things that you like? The reason I said money talks at the beginning of this is because it's a true statement. Money does talk. And I would actually very much like to see that be used here as a way to get universities back on track. And while I think the idea of funding specific conservative things in a university is good, don't forget that you have to have administrators' approval to get those kinds of things. To get those kinds of things in there, you have to have the approval of the department, the university, things like that, to get endowed chairs and other stuff. Or the said think tanks to be there at a university. And it doesn't necessarily, having a think tank or an endowed chair doesn't necessarily change the culture overall. It pushes it in a direction, but that's certainly not enough. So I've done this actually with my alma mater, and I think this is something that anyone who's an alma mater of a university that wants to see better things out of their universities can do. Because, I mean, it does get their attention when people stop donating. And I actually do encourage you to stop donating. And in fact, this is where I want to flip over to Twitter. This popped up from GB News in the UK, and I thought it was worth a listen to, because this is something that is going on in the UK. Let's have a listen.
Stopped donating money and will instead fund. Durham University's largest donor has stopped donating money and will instead fund the fight for free speech. Retired hedge fund manager Mark Hillary has gifted more than £7 million over the last few years, but says that they're not going to get another penny unless they get their free speech house properly in order. His decision comes after a rise in what he considers campus wokery, which has seen speakers banned and academics bullied out for voicing their opinions. That money is now going to the Free Speech Union. And founder and director Toby Young is with me now. Toby, thanks for joining me. This is fantastic that one of these alumni that often gives lots of money to the universities is now going to you.
So this happened in the UK, Durham University. And Durham University's largest donor basically said, I'm not going to pay for anything at the university until you get back to honoring free speech at the university. And instead of going to the university, he decided to invest it and give the money to a group called the Free Speech Union, which is very similar to the Academic Freedom Alliance in the United States. Not quite to Heterodox Academy. Heterodox Academy is a little bit different, but he's basically decided, you know what, I'm going to give my money to a group that promotes these values of free speech and academic freedom at every university, not just at Durham University. That is another way to do it. And this is what I would encourage for you all who are, if you're listening and you happen to be a wealthy donor and you're investigating a university and you don't like what they're doing, this is something I would recommend for the United States. Academic Freedom Alliance, Heterodox Academy, FIRE might be a good one, FAIR. It's up to you which one you donate to, I don't care. But that is one way to do it. To redirect your funds to not support the universities themselves per se, but to support the professors, because a lot of the people who are members of Heterodox Academic Freedom Alliance Free Speech Union are professors or staff or students with these universities who are just sick of this and want to see it pushed for. And the reason I say something like that is that that would be one of the ways, I think, to get back around to the first point that this author made, that the professor here made, in that those institutions have been pushing for the Chicago principles, amongst other things, at many universities in the United States for quite some time. That would be a way to push for that, and then come back and talk about funding the universities and down shares and what have you. But helping them to recognize it's a problem by ripping away the money for a little while at least, and putting it towards institutions that promote free speech at universities, promote the Chicago principles at universities, is, I think, a great way, actually, to do that. Not just funding the endowed shares. Because I think you do better getting to the endowed shares and to the think tanks and to some of the institutions like that at universities when you actually start encouraging the administration to change the culture. And that's why I say money talks. Money is the influence, which is why getting involved in campuses is much more productive than efforts to defund them. Furthermore, the more conservative students who receive degrees, the more conservative professors will teach students in the next generation. That's not necessarily a guarantee. That's not necessarily a guarantee, because what if the conservative student has a lousy experience with the university and says, I don't want to go back and teach? There's more opportunities for professors to, there's more opportunities than just teaching and being a professor. Put it that way. The rest of this in here, I think, is a good read to look at. In here, universities need fewer administrators. That is one big part of the problem. Here, along with building resilience. The best thing we can do for our students is to encourage them to remain strong in the face of adversity and unpleasantness. Certainly, issues such as crime, stalking, sexual harassment, etc., require intervention, as do students in an immediate mental health crisis. But we should stop the trigger warnings for most classes. They don't work and may make things worse, if not worse, not better. Exactly. Need to stop treating histrionic outbursts and public rage or tears as unique evidence of sagacity. Never heard of that word before. Often rage is a symptom of fragility and error, not wisdom. Sympathy does not require unlimited deference to emotion. The pain, trauma, or lived experience do not trump data in debate. We should be respectful of all people, allowing them to live how they wish, but should stop rewarding standpoint epistemology or encouraging contests of victimhood. We should ignore outbursts on Twitter or Instagram. Social media does not generally produce reliable information. Things are bad in academia. Universities may be at a nadir, but all is not lost. We should not accept uncritically the right's depiction of academia as censorious horror show of progressive activism. I have the good fortune, for example, to work at a university with a clear Chicago-style free speech commitment in a department where we all get along and nobody wants to destroy anyone's career, even if we disagree. I've been fortunate to find employment I love at a university that has, thus far, at least, navigated the culture war shoals relatively well. Not every faculty or student is so lucky, of course. Still, there are many things good about academia. The opportunity to teach the best evidence to students is unrivaled, and it is important to emphasize that most students want this, not leftist indoctrination. The challenges to the university are real and myriad, but if we keep this in mind and refuse to cave to a loud, zealous minority, academia will remain a vibrant and important institution that defends free speech and inquiry while promoting the best that the West has to offer. We are in crisis, yes, a kind of winter of the soul of the academy, but we are not dead on the vine. Difficult to see a path to the summer so long as we avoid unnecessary despair. It's not difficult to see a path to the summer so long as we avoid unnecessary despair and hyperbole while attending to the very real problems and complaints. So, like I said, I think money talks in this situation. I do think it's actually a bit worse than he thinks, given some of the entrenchment with certain things with administration that have gone on for a very, very, very long time, and you don't get rid of that overnight. So, I do think I want to see some new institutions, like I said, and I don't think it's as great of shape as this professor necessarily thinks. That's just a difference of magnitude opinion, But overall, I like the ideas of what to do here. And I think it'd be a good idea in particular for those of you who donate to a university as an alumni. Rethink your donation a little bit. Demand that they, do some things. Demand that they have the Chicago principles. Demand that they are keeping free speech. Demand that they're looking at. Look at where that school lines up on the college free expression survey. Are they good? Are they bad? Start doing that kind of stuff. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door. Comment on the video. Share the video. Subscribe to the channel. All that lovely good jazz. It's good to be back with you. Happy New Year. And until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, everybody.